Some people enter prison expecting to serve their time. Others never make it out alive. What you're about to hear are 24 stories of death behind bars. Some were murdered, some were silenced, others simply vanished. And in almost every case, the truth died with them. These are the most disturbing, unsolved prison deaths in modern history. Case 1. Jeffrey Epstein, August 10th, 2019, 1:30 in the morning. Inside the Metropolitan Correctional Center in New York City, guards are making their rounds. They approach cell number 220 on the 9th floor special housing unit. What they find inside will spark conspiracy theories that persist to this day. Jeffrey Edward Epstein is dead. The 66-year-old financier is kneeling beside his bunk, motionless. A strip of bedsheet is wrapped around his neck, fastened to the top rail of his bed. His skin is cold. There's no pulse. Guards shout for help. They call for him to breathe. Emergency responders rush him to New York Downtown Hospital. But it's too late. At 6:39 a.m., Jeffrey Epstein is pronounced dead. The official story, suicide by hanging. But here's where it gets complicated. Just 3 weeks earlier, on July 23rd, Epstein was found semi-conscious in his cell, with marks on his neck. His cellmate at the time was Nicholas Tartaglione, a former cop charged with 4 murders. Tartaglione was questioned but cleared. After that incident, Epstein was placed on suicide watch for 6 days. Constant observation. No sheets, no belts, nothing he could use to hurt himself. Then, suddenly, he was taken off watch. Psychiatrists concluded he was no longer a risk. On August 9th, the night before his death, Epstein met with his lawyers. They later said he seemed calm, even optimistic about his appeal. His cellmate had been transferred earlier that day, leaving him alone in his cell. And that's when things went wrong. 2 guards were assigned to check on him every 30 minutes. They didn't. Later investigations revealed both guards had fallen asleep. For about 3 hours, they slept intermittently, then falsified the logs to cover it up. They wrote inmate and cell okay when they never even looked. And the cameras? 2 surveillance cameras near Epstein's cell malfunctioned that night. Another one captured footage so grainy it was deemed unusable. By dawn, when guards finally checked, Epstein was already gone. The Bureau of Prisons ruled it suicide. New York City's chief medical examiner, Barbara Sampson, confirmed it. Suicide by hanging. But Dr. Michael Baden, a forensic pathologist hired by Epstein's attorneys, disagreed. He pointed to fractures in Epstein's hyoid bone and thyroid cartilage. Injuries, he said, were more consistent with strangulation than hanging. Other medical experts pushed back. They said those injuries can happen in hangings, especially in older men. In 2023, a detailed Department of Justice Inspector General investigation concluded that Epstein had indeed died by suicide. The report blamed systemic negligence and gross staff misconduct, not outside interference. But the questions remain. How does a man on suicide watch, surrounded by guards and cameras, end up dead in less than 2 weeks? How do 2 guards fall asleep at the same time? How do 3 cameras fail on the same night? And then there's Jean-Luc Brunel. Brunel was a French modeling agent with close ties to Epstein. On February 19, 2022, he was found dead in his jail cell at La Santé Prison in Paris. Same method, same circumstances. He was awaiting trial on charges of rape and trafficking. His death was also ruled suicide. 2 men, same connections, same fate. After Epstein's death, all charges against him were dismissed. His estate was placed under the control of executors, named in a will he signed just 2 days before he died. His body was claimed by his brother, Mark Epstein, and buried in an unmarked grave beside his parents at the Star of David Mausoleum in Palm Beach, Florida. The 2 guards on duty that night were indicted for falsifying records. But the bigger questions about what Epstein knew, who he could implicate, and why he died remain unanswered. Jeffrey Epstein served only 35 days in federal custody before his death ended all pending criminal proceedings. His passing prompted major policy reviews in federal facilities, but the official record, reaffirmed years later, remains the same. Jeffrey Edward Epstein died by suicide at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in New York City. Whether you believe that or not is up to you. Case 2, Alexei Navalny, February 16, 2024. Somewhere deep in the Russian Arctic, at the IK-3 Polar Wolf Penal Colony in Karp, Yamalo-Nenets Autonomous Okrug, a prisoner returns from his daily walk. It's freezing, the kind of cold that burns your lungs. This place was designed to break people. The man's name is Alexei Navalny, and within minutes, he'll be dead. According to the Federal Penitentiary Service, Navalny suddenly loses consciousness. Guards rush in. They attempt resuscitation for over 30 minutes. Nothing works. At 2:17 p.m. local time, Russia's most prominent opposition leader is pronounced dead. He was 47 years old. The official cause? Arrhythmia, a sudden heart condition. Russian investigators later classify his death as non-criminal. No foul play, no further investigation needed. But the timeline doesn't add up. Just 1 day earlier, on February 15th, Navalny appeared in court via video link. Observers who saw him said he looked healthy. He was in good spirits, even joking with the judge. Less than 24 hours later, he's dead. Navalny had spent the last 3 years moving between Russian prisons, each one harsher than the last. He described his conditions in letters smuggled out. A freezing damp cell with little ventilation, a fixed iron bunk, and constant surveillance. His requests for medical attention were routinely ignored. By December 2023, he was transferred to Polar Wolf, one of the most remote and brutal facilities in Russia. He was placed in solitary confinement for the 27th time. In total, he'd spent nearly 300 days in isolation. But here's what makes his death even more suspicious. Inmates at the prison later reported an unusual inspection the night before Navalny died. Guards swept through the facility, removing people from their cells. Some prisoners claimed Navalny may have died earlier than officially stated. Human rights group Gulagu.net reported that cameras inside the facility had been disabled 2 days before his death, and when his body was finally examined, it bore bruises. Officials later attributed them to post-mortem compressions from resuscitation efforts. Medical experts found that explanation hard to believe. After his death, Navalny's body was transferred under heavy security to a morgue in Salakard, but for days, it went missing. His mother, Lyudmila, was denied access. When she was finally allowed to see him, she was forced to sign a death certificate listing natural causes. His wife, Yulia Navalnaya, rejected the official story. She said her husband had complained of sharp abdominal pain shortly before his death. She accused officials of concealing evidence and suggested he had been poisoned. This wouldn't be the first time someone tried to kill Alexei Navalny. In August 2020, he was poisoned with Novichok, a military-grade nerve agent, while on a flight in Russia. He collapsed mid-air. Only emergency medical intervention saved his life. He was airlifted to Germany where doctors confirmed the poisoning. It took him months to recover. Despite the danger, Navalny returned to Russia in January 2021. He knew what was waiting for him. The moment he landed at the airport, he was arrested. He was sentenced on charges of fraud and extremism, charges widely regarded as politically motivated. For the next 3 years, he endured beatings, isolation, and medical neglect. He never stopped speaking out. He smuggled letters to the outside world. He mocked Putin. He refused to be silenced. And then, in February 2024, he was. Navalny's body was finally returned to his family on February 24th, 8 days after his death. His funeral took place on March 1st, 2024, at the Church of the Icon of the Mother of God, Soothe My Sorrows, in Moscow's Marino district. Thousands of people showed up to pay their respects, despite heavy police presence and government restrictions. He was buried at Borisovo Cemetery in the Bratislava district of Moscow. Alexei Navalny served 3 years of his 19-year sentence before dying in custody under disputed circumstances. As of 2025, the exact cause of his death and accountability for it remain unresolved. Officially, he died of natural causes while still under Russian federal custody. But the world knows better. Case 3. Otto Warmbier, December 29, 2015. A 21-year-old college student from Cincinnati, Ohio, steps off a plane in Pyongyang, North Korea. His name is Otto Warmbier. He's traveling with a Chinese-based tour company called Young Pioneer Tours. The trip is supposed to last 5 days. A quick detour before he starts a study program in Hong Kong. It will be the worst decision of his life. On January 2nd, 2016, as Warmbier prepares to leave at Pyongyang International Airport, North Korean security agents pull him aside. His tour group watches as he's quietly led away by guards. He doesn't resist. He doesn't know what's happening. He will never be seen conscious again. Weeks later, North Korean state media accuses Warmbier of committing a hostile act against the state. They claim he tried to steal a propaganda poster from a restricted area of the Yanggakdo International Hotel. In February, he appears at a press conference. He's visibly emotional, apologizing and begging for forgiveness. Observers note signs of distress. Many believe his statement was made under duress. On March 16, 2016, after a 1-hour trial in North Korea's Supreme Court, Warmbier is convicted of subversion. His sentence? 15 years of hard labor. But shortly after his conviction, something catastrophic happens. North Korean authorities later claim Warmbier contracted botulism and slipped into a coma after taking a sleeping pill. Medical experts in the United States found no evidence of botulism, but records released by North Korea indicate that by April 2016, barely a month after his conviction, Warmbier was in an unresponsive state. For 17 months, his condition was kept secret. In early June 2017, during diplomatic discussions, North Korean officials finally informed the U.S. government that Warmbier has been in a coma for over a year. A special delegation is sent to retrieve him. On June 13th, Warmbier is flown home to Cincinnati. He's still comatose. His parents are devastated. Doctors at the University of Cincinnati Medical Center examine him. They determine he's in a persistent vegetative state. He's breathing on his own, but there are no signs of awareness. Brain scans reveal extensive tissue loss consistent with prolonged oxygen deprivation. Physicians note that while his body bears no visible signs of torture, the cause of his brain injury remains unknown. Warmbier never regains consciousness. On June 19, 2017, Just 6 days after his return, his parents make the heartbreaking decision to remove his feeding tube. He dies that afternoon. He was 22 years old. The cause of death is attributed to brain damage caused by lack of oxygen. But the exact event that led to it remains undetermined. North Korean officials deny mistreatment. They call his detention and medical care humanitarian. But witness testimony paints a different picture. Former detainees later suggest that Warmbier may have been subjected to physical mistreatment during interrogation. Some allege water torture. However, no definitive evidence confirms the cause of his injuries. Warmbier's funeral takes place 3 days later at Wyoming High School in Ohio. More than 2,000 mourners attend. He's buried at Oak Hill Cemetery in Glendale, Ohio. In December 2018, his parents pursue legal action against North Korea. A U.S. federal court finds the North Korean government liable for torture, hostage-taking, and extrajudicial killing. The Warmbier family is awarded $51 million in damages. North Korea does not contest or acknowledge the judgment. In his memory, a scholarship fund is later established for North Korean defectors. Otto Warmbier served only 17 months of his 15-year sentence before dying shortly after his release from North Korea. He was not murdered by another inmate, but he died as a result of severe, unexplained brain injury sustained in custody. His burial at Oak Hill Cemetery marks the end of a case that remains one of the most controversial and tragic detentions of a foreigner in North Korea's modern history. Case 4. Kenneth Trentadue, August 21, 1995. Early morning. At the Federal Transfer Center in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, guards discover a body in cell 23C. The prisoner's name is Kenneth Michael Trentadue. He's hanging from a noose made of bed sheets. The official report calls it suicide. But when his family receives his remains, they find something that doesn't match the story. Multiple bruises, deep cuts, lacerations inconsistent with hanging. His throat has been slit. His skull bears heavy, blunt force trauma. This wasn't suicide. This was murder. Kenneth Trentadue was born in West Virginia and raised in a coal mining family. When the industry collapsed, his family moved to California. He struggled through adolescence. In his late teens, he dropped out of school and later developed a heroin addiction after serving in the U.S. Army. His criminal record began with non-violent bank robberies committed using a toy gun. He was sentenced to 20 years, but served only 6 before his release in 1988. After prison, Trentadue turned his life around. He married. He found steady work in construction. He lived quietly with his wife and newborn son, Vito. For 7 years, he stayed clean. Then, in June 1995, 2 months after the Oklahoma City bombing, Trentadue was detained while crossing from Mexico into California on a parole violation. He was later transferred to the Federal Transfer Center in Oklahoma City. 2 days before his death, he spoke with his brother, Jesse, by phone. He sounded optimistic. He was in good spirits. 48 hours later, he was dead. Prison officials claimed they found him hanging from a noose in his cell early on the morning of August 21st. But the condition of his body told a different story. Medical examiner Dr. Fred Jordan refused to rule the death a suicide. He stated that the pattern of injuries suggested abuse and possible torture. Kevin Rowland, the chief investigator for the state medical examiner's office, filed a formal complaint with the FBI. He noted that he had been denied entry to the cell and that it had been cleaned before forensic examination. a direct violation of investigative procedure. Federal agents listed murder and foul play suspected in their own internal notes. So what really happened? Family members and investigators later alleged that Trentadue was mistaken for Richard Lee Guthrie, a member of the Aryan Republican Army and suspected associate of Oklahoma City bomber Timothy McVeigh. Guthrie and Trentadue bore striking physical similarities. Same height, same build, dark hair, nearly identical tattoos. Both men also resembled the composite sketch of John Doe No. 2, a figure believed to be connected to McVeigh. McVeigh himself, during conversations on death row, told fellow inmate David Paul Hammer that he believed Trentadue had been mistaken for Guthrie and beaten to death during interrogation. Less than 1 year later, Guthrie was also found dead in his cell. The death was again ruled suicide. Another potential witness, inmate Alden Gillis Baker, claimed to have seen guards enter Trentadue's cell the night he died. Baker was later found hanged in his cell under similar circumstances. The official investigations that followed were repeatedly criticized for lack of transparency. The Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division and a federal grand jury both declined to press criminal charges. Dr. Jordan continued to insist that the death was likely homicide, but under mounting pressure from federal officials, he changed the cause of death from unknown to suicide in 1998. He later said the reversal was made under duress. In 1999, the U.S. Inspector General's report concluded there was no evidence of murder. But it did find that federal employees had given false testimony and mishandled the case. The Trentadue family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the federal government. They were awarded $1.1 million for emotional distress. However, the government appealed the decision multiple times before payment was eventually ordered. Despite the civil outcome, no individual was ever criminally charged. In 2008, the family offered a $250,000 reward for information leading to a murder conviction. Legal petitions for additional FBI documents continued for years afterward. Kenneth Trentadue's official cause of death remains listed as suicide, but his family, medical examiners, and investigators know the truth. He was murdered. Case 5. Sandra Bland, July 10, 2015, Prairie View, Texas. Sandra Bland is driving down University Drive when she sees flashing lights in her rearview mirror. She pulls over. A Texas state trooper named Brian Encinia approaches her window. The reason for the stop? Failing to signal a lane change. What happens next will be captured on dashcam footage, and it will spark a national outcry. The traffic stop starts routine enough. Encinia asks for her license and registration, but the tone quickly shifts. He orders Bland to put out her cigarette. She refuses. It's her car. She has the right to smoke in it. Encinia doesn't like that. He orders her out of the vehicle. She asks why. He doesn't answer. Instead, he opens her door, reaches inside, and tries to pull her out. When she resists, he points a taser at her face. "I will light you up," he says. Bland is forcibly removed from her car and thrown to the ground. Witnesses film part of the altercation. In the video, Bland is on the pavement, complaining that her head has been slammed. She's handcuffed and arrested. The charge? Assaulting a public servant. She's transported to Waller County Jail in Hempstead, Texas. Her bail is set at $5,000. To get out, she needs $500. She doesn't have it. She calls family and friends. She tries to scrape together the money, but no one can get it in time. Sandra Bland spends 3 days in that jail. On July 13, 2015, at around 9 a.m., a guard offers her breakfast. She declines. Roughly an hour later, officers discover her unresponsive in her cell. She's found in a semi-standing position, suspended from a metal partition using a plastic garbage bag. Attempts at resuscitation fail. She's pronounced dead at the scene. An autopsy performed by the Harris County Institute of Forensic Sciences concludes that Bland died of asphyxiation. The report notes abrasions on her back and wrists, as well as older self-inflicted cuts on her arm. Toxicology results show a high level of THC in her blood, which officials suggest was from prior marijuana use before her arrest. The official ruling? Suicide. But Bland's family disputes this. They point to inconsistencies in jail procedures, missing phone records, and unclear surveillance footage. During intake, jail staff asked Bland if she had ever attempted suicide. One form says she had, following a miscarriage. Another form says she hadn't. The records contradict each other. Fellow inmate Alexandria Pyle later recalls that Bland appeared distraught and cried often. She was frustrated that no one had secured her release. But Pyle also says Bland was angry, not suicidal. Texas and federal authorities opened parallel investigations. The Texas Commission on Jail Standards finds that Waller County jail staff failed to perform mandatory hourly inmate checks. They also hadn't completed required mental health training. The FBI joins the investigation, but no one is criminally charged for her death. In December 2015, a grand jury declines to indict any jail officials. However, the following month, Brian Encinia is indicted for perjury for making false statements about the arrest. He's later fired and permanently banned from law enforcement in 2017 after the charges dismissed in exchange for his agreement to end his policing career. Bland's family pursues a civil wrongful death lawsuit against Waller County, the Sheriff's Office, and the Texas Department of Public Safety. In September 2016, they reach a settlement worth $1.9 million. The settlement also requires jail procedural reforms. Bland's death leads to widespread public reaction. Protests and vigils are held across the United States. Her name becomes a rallying cry within the Black Lives Matter movement. In 2017, the Texas legislature passes the Sandra Bland Act. The law mandates mental health evaluations for inmates, de-escalation training for police, and stricter procedures for investigating in-custody deaths. Sandra Bland's funeral is held on July 22, 2015, at the DuPage African Methodist Episcopal Church in Leal, Illinois. She's buried in her home state, surrounded by family. Sandra Annette Bland served no sentence. She was awaiting trial at the time of her death. She died 3 days after her arrest, under conditions later determined to have violated state jail standards. As of later investigations, no one has been convicted or held criminally responsible for her death at Waller County Jail, Texas. Case 6, Eddie Murray, June 12, 1981. Wee Waa, New South Wales, Australia. It's a Friday morning. A 21-year-old Aboriginal rugby league player named Eddie Murray is walking near the main street of town. He's been drinking, but he's not violent. Witnesses later say he was laughing and talking. 2 police officers from the Wee Waa police station approach him. He's arrested for being drunk and disorderly under the Intoxicated Persons Act of 1979. It's around 2:30 in the afternoon when he's taken into custody. He's placed alone in a holding cell. Less than 1 hour later, Eddie Murray is dead. At approximately 3:30 p.m., Police officers report finding him unresponsive, hanging by a piece of blanket tied to a bar in his cell. Efforts to revive him are unsuccessful. He's declared dead shortly afterward. Authorities immediately rule the death a suicide, but Eddie's family doesn't believe it. Edward James Murray was born on December 6th in New South Wales to Arthur Edward Murray and Layla Jane Murray, respected community members and advocates for Indigenous rights. He grew up in Wee Waa, where he was known for his athletic ability and strong connection to local Aboriginal sporting teams. By his early 20s, Murray had gained recognition as a talented rugby league player. He was set to travel to Sydney to join the Red Fern All Blacks on a tour of New Zealand. It was supposed to be the opportunity of a lifetime. How does a young, optimistic man planning a sporting trip take his own life within 1 hour of being detained? Eddie's parents, Arthur and Layla Murray, reject the official explanation. They question the lack of clear photographic or forensic evidence. They point to discrepancies in the timeline of events. Over the years, Murray's death becomes one of the earliest and most prominent cases to highlight the issue of Aboriginal deaths in custody in Australia. His parents lead a persistent campaign for truth and justice, arguing that their son may have been assaulted before his death. Murray's case is later examined by several major inquiries, including the Muirhead Royal Commission, the New South Wales Anti-Discrimination Board's report on street offences, and the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody, which begins in 1988. Although these inquiries find no conclusive evidence of deliberate killing, they identify serious procedural flaws in how police handle Aboriginal detainees. They note the lack of proper supervision and failure to safeguard vulnerable prisoners. In 1997, after continuous efforts from the Murray family, Eddie's body is exhumed for a second autopsy. The forensic pathologist discovers a previously undetected fractured sternum. The injury likely occurred immediately before death. This raises significant suspicion that he sustained trauma inconsistent with hanging. But despite this finding, no new charges or disciplinary actions are brought against any individuals. The official cause of death remains undetermined. Throughout the years following his death, Murray's family continues to advocate for accountability and broader reforms in police and custodial practices. His father, Arthur Murray, becomes a well-known figure in the movement for justice for Aboriginal Australians, dedicating his life to campaigning against deaths in custody until his passing in 2002. Eddie Murray's death remains officially unresolved. He's buried in his hometown of Wee Waa, following a community-led funeral attended by family, friends, and supporters who call for answers that never come. His legacy has become symbolic of the ongoing struggle against institutional neglect and racial injustice within Australia's legal system. He served less than 1 hour in custody before being found dead in the Wee Waa police station. As of later investigations, his death remains unsolved, with no individual ever charged or held accountable. Eddie Murray is remembered as a young athlete whose life ended under unexplained and deeply contested circumstances. Case 7. Rudolf Hess, August 17, 1987. Spandau Prison, West Berlin. A British guard walks through the prison garden doing his routine check. It's a quiet morning, the kind of morning where nothing should go wrong. He approaches a small summer house at the edge of the garden. What he finds inside will close one of history's strangest chapters. Rudolf Hess is dead. The 93-year-old former Nazi deputy Führer is slumped near a window, an electrical extension cord wrapped around his neck, tied to a window latch. His body is cold. There's no pulse. Guards attempt resuscitation. It's useless. He's been dead for hours. The official explanation: suicide. But Rudolf Hess was 93 years old. He was nearly blind. He suffered from chronic stomach ailments. He could barely walk without assistance. How does a man like that hang himself? Rudolf Walter Richard Hess was born in Alexandria, Egypt in 1894. After Germany's defeat in World War I, he joined the early Nazi movement and quickly became one of Adolf Hitler's most trusted associates. He helped edit Mein Kampf during their imprisonment, following the failed beer hall putsch in Munich. When Hitler rose to power in 1933, Hess was appointed deputy Führer. He signed into law many of the Nazi regime's most brutal decrees, including the anti-Jewish Nuremberg laws. He was one of the most powerful men in Germany. But by 1941, his influence was fading. Martin Bormann was replacing him in Hitler's inner circle, and Hess was growing desperate. On May 10, 1941, Hess did something no one expected. He secretly flew from Augsburg, Germany to Scotland in a twin-engine Messerschmitt Bf 100. He was hoping to negotiate peace with Britain. He parachuted out near Glasgow and was captured by a Scottish farmer. At first, he identified himself as Alfred Horn, but he was soon recognized and taken into British custody. His flight shocked both Germany and Britain. Hitler, embarrassed by the act, declared Hess insane and stripped him of all titles. He ordered his execution should he ever return. Hess spent the rest of the war in British custody. After the war, he stood trial at the Nuremberg trials in 1946. He was convicted of crimes against peace and conspiracy, but acquitted of war crimes and crimes against humanity. The tribunal sentenced him to life imprisonment. Despite several appeals and international petitions for his release due to declining health, the Soviet Union vetoed all efforts. He was transferred to Spandau prison in West Berlin, where he remained under strict four-power supervision alongside other Nazi war criminals. Over time, other prisoners were released. By 1966, Rudolf Hess became the only inmate left in the vast facility, a single prisoner in a prison built for 600. His life in Spandau was marked by isolation, routine, and suspicion. He was allowed limited visits from his wife and son, Wolf Rüdiger Hess. He maintained correspondence with his family. Guards from the United States, the United Kingdom, France, and the Soviet Union rotated monthly to supervise him. Reports described him as frail, nearly blind, and suffering from chronic ailments. Despite his advanced age, Hess continued to insist that his peace mission had been an act of loyalty to Germany, not treason. On the evening of August 16, 1987, Hess met with his family. They later said he seemed tired but not distressed. The next morning, he was found dead. The autopsy confirmed asphyxiation consistent with hanging. The British government declared his death self-inflicted, but controversy immediately followed. Hess's family and several researchers claimed that he, weakened by age and physical incapacity, could not have tied a cord or lifted himself into a position to hang. They alleged that he was murdered, possibly by intelligence operatives seeking to prevent his release and potential revelations. These claims, however, remain unproven. British and German investigations reaffirmed the original finding of suicide, noting no evidence of foul play. After Hess's death, Spandau prison was demolished. Authorities wanted to prevent the site from becoming a neo-Nazi pilgrimage ground. building was torn down later that year, and the land was converted into a shopping center. His body was buried in the Hess family plot in Wunsiedel, Bavaria, bearing the inscription Ich hab's gewagt, I dared. Neo-Nazi gatherings at his grave led to repeated government interventions. In 2011, authorities ordered his remains exhumed and cremated. His ashes were scattered at sea, and the gravestone was destroyed to prevent further political exploitation. Rudolf Hess served over 40 years of his life sentence, longer than any other Nuremberg convict, before his death in Spandau prison. Whether suicide or murder, his end remains one of the most disputed deaths in post-war history. As of today, Hess's imprisonment and death are remembered as the final chapter of Nazi leadership's legacy behind bars. Case 8. Albert DeSalvo. November 25, 1973, Massachusetts Correctional Institution at Walpole. It's early morning. Guards are making their rounds through the prison infirmary. They approach one of the cells and look inside. Albert DeSalvo is lying on the floor. He's not moving. They rush in. Blood is everywhere. DeSalvo has been stabbed multiple times in the chest and abdomen. The wounds are deep, brutal. Whoever did this wanted him dead. Despite immediate medical attention, it's too late. Albert Henry DeSalvo, the man who confessed to being the Boston Strangler, is dead at 42 years old. An investigation begins immediately. Inmates are questioned, cells are searched, but no one talks. No weapon is found. One inmate stands out. Robert Wilson, a prisoner with ties to the Winter Hill Gang. He's charged with the murder. But when his trial begins, the jury can't reach a verdict. It ends in a hung jury. Robert Wilson walks free. To this day, DeSalvo's murder remains officially unsolved. Albert DeSalvo was born in Chelsea, Massachusetts in 1931. He grew up in a violent household. His father was an abusive alcoholic who often brutalized his wife and children. From early adolescence, DeSalvo showed disturbing behavioral problems: theft, assault, and animal cruelty. By his mid-teens, he was repeatedly sent to reform schools. Eventually, he enlisted in the United States Army, where he served as a military police sergeant. He was honorably discharged after 2 tours. In the early 1960s, Boston was gripped by fear. Between June 1962 and January 1964, 13 women were murdered in their homes. Each victim was strangled. The killer left behind a signature. The ligature used to strangle them was often tied in a bow around their necks. The press called him the Boston Strangler. Police had no leads. The city was paralyzed with terror. Women installed extra locks. They refused to open their doors to strangers. But the murders continued. Then, in 1964, DeSalvo was arrested for a separate string of sexual assaults known as the Green Man or Measuring Man assaults. While in custody, he confessed to fellow inmate George Nassar that he was the Boston Strangler. The confession attracted national attention. During his trial in 1967, DeSalvo's attorney F. Lee Bailey pursued an insanity defense. He hoped to secure psychiatric treatment rather than execution. DeSalvo was convicted of multiple counts of rape and assault and sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. Although he was never formally tried for the Boston Strangler murders, his confession was widely accepted at the time. But there was a problem. Years later, forensic experts and investigators began questioning the accuracy of his confession. They pointed to inconsistencies between his accounts and the evidence. Some victims' families doubted he was the real killer. Others believed he confessed to crimes he didn't commit, seeking fame or a transfer to a psychiatric facility. While incarcerated at Bridgewater State Hospital, DeSalvo escaped in February 1967, along with 2 other inmates. He left a note claiming the escape was to protest prison conditions. 3 days later, he voluntarily contacted his lawyer and surrendered to police in Lynn, Massachusetts. He was transferred to Walpole Maximum Security Prison afterward, where he reportedly lived quietly, but maintained contact with his wife and children through letters. In the months before his death, DeSalvo confided to family members that he intended to reveal new information about the Boston Strangler case, information that he believed would prove his innocence. On the night of November 24, 1973, he was seen speaking with several inmates before returning to his cell in the prison infirmary. Early the next morning, guards discovered his body. He'd been stabbed multiple times. The weapon was never recovered. Prison officials suspected the killing may have been connected to drug trafficking within the facility. DeSalvo was believed to have sold amphetamines at prices that undercut the inmate syndicate. That may have gotten him killed. His body was released to his family and buried privately in Massachusetts. Nearly 40 years later, in 2013, DNA evidence conclusively linked DeSalvo to the rape and murder of 19-year-old Mary Sullivan, the final victim of the Boston Strangler series. The DNA match confirmed that DeSalvo was responsible for at least one of the murders, but doubts remain as to whether he was responsible for all 13. As of the official record, Albert Henry DeSalvo served only 6 years of his sentence before being murdered by an unidentified assailant in MCI Walpole. His death remains an unsolved homicide, and the truth about the Boston Strangler may have died with him. Case 9. Raoul Wallenberg. January the 17th, 1945, Budapest, Hungary. Soviet troops are closing in on the city. The Nazi occupation is collapsing. For thousands of Hungarian Jews, liberation is finally coming. But for one man, a different fate is waiting. Raoul Wallenberg, a Swedish diplomat, has just been summoned to meet with Soviet General Rodion Malinovsky. Witnesses hear his final words before he leaves. "I'm going to Malinovsky's. Whether as a guest or a prisoner, I do not know yet." He never returns. For the next 42 years, his fate will remain one of the greatest mysteries of the 20th century. Raoul Gustaf Wallenberg was born in 1912 in Lidingö municipality, Sweden. He came from one of the nation's most prominent families. After completing his studies in architecture at the University of Michigan in the mid-1930s, he began working internationally as a businessman. His exposure to Jewish refugees in Palestine and his partnership with Hungarian Jew Kalman Lauer shaped his awareness of Nazi atrocities. When the Nazi occupation of Hungary began in 1944, Wallenberg was recruited by the Swedish Foreign Ministry and the United States War Refugee Board. His mission? Aid Hungarian Jews facing deportation to concentration camps. Between July and December 1944, he issued thousands of Swedish protective passports, documents granting Jews safe status under neutral Sweden's protection. He also established numerous safe houses across Budapest, shielding families from arrest and deportation. Many survivors later credited him as the man who saved their lives during the darkest days of the Holocaust. Estimates suggest he saved tens of thousands of people. But on January the 17th, 1945, everything changed. Soviet intelligence agency Smersh detained Wallenberg, reportedly on suspicion of espionage. He was transported to Moscow's Lubyanka prison, the headquarters of the NKVD, the Soviet secret police. From that moment, Wallenberg's existence became confined within Soviet custody. Prison records later indicated he was interrogated only once, in early February 1945. After that, no verifiable communication emerged. In March of the same year, Soviet radio falsely announced that Wallenberg had been murdered by fascists in Hungary. The statement misled Swedish officials and delayed any search efforts. Years later, in 1957, Soviet authorities released a single document dated July 17, 1947. It claimed that Wallenberg died suddenly in his cell, allegedly from a heart attack. The note was signed by the head of the Lubyanka prison infirmary and ordered his cremation without an autopsy. The Swedish government was skeptical. They demanded further proof. None was given. But testimonies from other prisoners and defectors over subsequent decades contradicted the Soviet statement. Several inmates claimed to have seen or heard a foreign diplomat matching Wallenberg's description in prisons and psychiatric hospitals throughout the 1950s and even into the 1980s. British businessman Greville Wynne, held at Lubyanka in the early 1960s, stated that he had spoken with a man identifying himself as a Swedish diplomat. Similar accounts emerged from various Soviet facilities, though none were ever verified conclusively. In 1991, Russian investigator Vyacheslav Nikonov concluded that Wallenberg had likely been executed in late 1947 on direct orders from Soviet authorities. The precise reason remains disputed. Some reports suggest he was accused of aiding Nazi fugitives. Others say his ties with the U.S. Office of Strategic Services led to espionage suspicions. Later disclosures, including the diary of former KGB chief Ivan Serov found in 2016, supported the theory that Wallenberg was liquidated in Lubyanka that same year. No grave or remains were ever found. In 1989, Soviet officials returned a handful of his personal items to his family, his passport, money, and notebooks, claiming they had been rediscovered in storage. The gesture raised more questions than answers. In 2000, the Russian government posthumously exonerated Wallenberg and his driver, Vilmos Langfelder, recognizing them as victims of political repression. In 2016, the Swedish tax agency officially declared Wallenberg dead in absentia, setting his date of death as July 31, 1952, a procedural formality acknowledging decades of uncertainty. Raoul Wallenberg is believed to have been executed or died while imprisoned at Moscow's Lubyanka prison after serving roughly 2.5 years in secret Soviet custody. His body was never returned. No burial record exists. As of today, his death remains officially unresolved, an enduring symbol of a man who saved thousands, only to vanish behind prison walls in an unsolved act of political silence. The hero who rescued tens of thousands became a prisoner whose fate the world may never fully know. Case 10. Ian Watkins, October 11, 2025. HM Prison, Wakefield, West Yorkshire, England. It's early morning. The prison is starting to wake up. Inmates are moving through the corridors. Guards are making their rounds. In one section of the facility, 2 inmates approach another prisoner. They don't say a word. They know exactly what they're doing. Within seconds, Ian Watkins is on the ground. A blade flashes. He's stabbed in the neck. By the time guards arrive, it's too late. The 48-year-old former rock star is dead. 2 men are immediately arrested. A 25-year-old serving life for murder and a 43-year-old serving 24 years for abduction and assault. Both are charged with murder. 2 additional inmates are later arrested on suspicion of conspiracy to murder. The motive has not been publicly confirmed, but reports indicate that Watkins had been targeted since his arrival at Wakefield. The reason? The nature of his crimes. Ian David Karslake Watkins was born in Merthyr Tydfil, Wales. He became known as the frontman of the Welsh rock band Lost Prophets. The band achieved major success in the 2000s with 5 albums, 4 of which reached the UK top 10. On the surface, Watkins seemed like a successful musician living the dream. But behind closed doors, he was committing some of the most horrific crimes imaginable. In December 2013, Watkins was sentenced at Cardiff Crown Court to 29 years imprisonment and a 6-year extended license. His crimes? Multiple sexual abuse offenses involving children, including infants. The details that emerged during his trial shocked the nation. The judge described him as a determined and committed pedophile who showed no remorse. His ex-girlfriend recalled him possessing graphic images involving children and drug paraphernalia as early as 2010, before he was convicted. She made multiple complaints to South Wales police. Little action was taken at the time. Many other women came forward to report him. Still no action was taken against him. By the time police finally acted, the damage had been done. His co-defendants, 2 mothers who facilitated his crimes, also received long sentences. Watkins was initially held at HM Prison Park before being transferred to Wakefield, a high-security facility housing serious offenders. The reason for the transfer? So he could be closer to his mother after she had a kidney transplant. Wakefield is known as Monster Mansion, a prison that houses some of Britain's most dangerous criminals, including murderers, rapists, and child abusers. Watkins's prison life was turbulent from the start. In August 2023, he was briefly held hostage and stabbed by 3 inmates. He survived. Reports described him as largely isolated, receiving limited visits and spending most of his time under protective supervision. But protection can only go so far. On the morning of October 11, 2025, staff discovered Watkins unresponsive with a neck wound. Emergency responders declared him dead at the scene. Authorities later confirmed a murder investigation. A provisional trial for the 2 main suspects was scheduled for May 2026. Watkins served only 12 years of his 29-year term before being murdered by 2 inmates at HM Prison Wakefield. His burial location has not been publicly disclosed. In prison, there's an unwritten code. Certain crimes make you a target, and crimes against children, those put a bullseye on your back. Ian Watkins learned that the hard way. Some would say justice was served. Others would say he should have faced the full weight of the law. But one thing is certain. Ian Watkins died the way many believed he deserved to, violently and at the hands of fellow inmates. His death closed a dark chapter, but for his victims, the scars remain forever. Case 11, Theodore Kaczynski, June 10th, 2023. Federal Medical Center, Butner, North Carolina, early morning. Guards are doing their routine cell checks in the medical wing. They approach one of the cells and look inside. Theodore Kaczynski is hanging from a ligature. He's not breathing. Staff rush in. They attempt resuscitation. But it's too late. At 81 years old, the man once known as the Unabomber is dead. The official ruling? Suicide by hanging. No foul play, no external involvement. He acted alone. But for a man who spent nearly 3 decades trying to bring down modern civilization, it's a quiet end to a violent life. Theodore John Kaczynski was born in Chicago, Illinois in 1942. He was a child prodigy. By age 16, he was accepted into Harvard University. By 25, He was an assistant professor of mathematics at the University of California, Berkeley. But something changed. In 1971, Kaczynski abruptly resigned from his teaching position and retreated to a remote cabin near Lincoln, Montana. No electricity, no running water. He lived off the land, isolated from society. And he began building bombs. Between 1978 and 1995, Kaczynski waged a 17-year bombing campaign against universities, airlines, and corporate offices. His homemade explosives killed 3 people and injured 23 others. He called it a war against industrialization and technology. He believed that technological advancement was destroying human freedom and nature. The FBI called it the longest and costliest investigation in its history. For years, they had no idea who he was. He left no fingerprints, no witnesses. He was careful, methodical. The press dubbed him the Unabomber, a reference to his early targets, universities and airlines. Then, in 1995, Kaczynski sent a 35,000-word manifesto to major newspapers. The title, Industrial Society and Its Future. He demanded it be published. If they refused, he threatened to continue killing. The Washington Post and the New York Times published it, and that's what led to his capture. Kaczynski's brother David recognized the writing style, the phrasing, the ideas. He contacted the FBI. On April 3, 1996, federal agents raided Kaczynski's cabin in Montana. Inside, they found thousands of pages of handwritten notes, bomb-making materials, and one live explosive device ready for use. He was arrested without incident. In 1998, Kaczynski pleaded guilty to all charges in a deal that spared him the death penalty. He received 8 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. He was sent to ADX Florence in Colorado, the federal supermax prison known as the Alcatraz of the Rockies. At ADX Florence, Kaczynski lived in near total isolation for over 2 decades. 23 hours a day in his cell, 1 hour of recreation alone, no contact with other inmates. He spent most of his days writing letters, reading, and corresponding with journalists and academics. Some viewed his manifesto as a philosophical critique of industrialization. Others saw it as the ramblings of a violent extremist. Kaczynski never expressed regret for the bombings or the lives lost. He described his imprisonment as a continuation of his resistance against modern society. In letters, he often stated that life in confinement is still life outside the system. In 2021, the Bureau of Prisons transferred him to the Federal Medical Center in Butner, North Carolina, following a cancer diagnosis. Reports indicated that by 2023, he had stopped receiving treatment. His health was deteriorating. He was isolated. He was 81 years old. On June 10, 2023, he was found unresponsive in his cell. Prison authorities later confirmed that he had died by suicide through hanging. The incident occurred in the early morning hours. Despite resuscitation attempts by staff, Kaczynski was pronounced dead shortly after being discovered. No foul play or external involvement was reported. His death was ruled suicide by the Federal Bureau of Prisons. The circumstances indicated that he had acted alone and planned the act in advance. His deteriorating health, isolation, and refusal of medical care in the months before his death were noted as possible contributing factors. At the time of his death, Kaczynski had served 25 years of his multiple life sentences. His body was taken from the Federal Medical Center in Butner, North Carolina, and cremated under federal supervision. No public ceremony or burial location was disclosed. His personal writings and possessions were seized by the Federal Bureau of Prisons as part of the post death administrative process. Theodore John Kaczynski, once a brilliant scholar turned anti-technology extremist, spent more than 2 decades under the strictest confinement in the United States federal system. He died after serving 25 years of his sentence within the custody of the Federal Bureau of Prisons on June 10, 2023. Officially recorded as suicide by hanging inside the Federal Medical Center, Butner, North Carolina. For a man who tried to bomb society back to the Stone Age, he died the way many do in prison, alone, forgotten, and by his own hand. Case 12. TaNeasha Anderson, July 16, 2021. Jackson County Jail, Brownstown, Indiana. It's early afternoon. An ambulance pulls up to the jail. Paramedics rush inside. They're told an inmate needs immediate medical attention. They find TaNeasha Anderson lying naked and unresponsive on her cell floor. She's been vomiting blood for hours. Her skin is pale. Her breathing is shallow. They rush her to Schneck Medical Center in Seymour, Indiana. Doctors work frantically to save her life. Less than 3 hours later, TaNeasha Anderson is dead. She was 23 years old. Hospital staff initially suspect she ingested a toxic substance, possibly antifreeze or ethylene glycol, but subsequent forensic testing can't confirm the presence of any poison. The autopsy lists her cause of death as probable toxicity of an unknown substance. The manner, undetermined. What is clear, however, is this. TaNeasha Anderson spent more than 12 hours begging for help, and no one came. TaNeasha was arrested on May 26, 2021, following an incident at the Edinburgh Premium Outlets in Indiana. Police reports stated she fled a store with stolen clothing valued at over $3,000, leading officers on a high-speed chase through several counties. The pursuit ended when she crashed her vehicle near Seymour. She was arrested after being tased and examined at Schneck Medical Center before being booked into Jackson County Jail. She faced multiple charges: theft, resisting law enforcement, reckless driving, causing injury, and leaving the scene of an accident. Her bond was set at $4,000. She couldn't pay. A motion to reduce it was denied in early July. While in custody, TaNeasha reportedly told her family and cellmates that she feared for her life. She said she was being harassed by other inmates and staff. Her sister, Rona Merle, later revealed that TaNeasha once found a noose placed in her bed. Despite the family's attempts to contact the jail about her safety, they received no response. On the night of July 15th, TaNeasha began vomiting blood. She complained of severe abdominal pain and fever. Jail surveillance and audio evidence later confirmed that she repeatedly begged officers and the facility nurse, Edward Epstein, to send her to a hospital. For over 12 hours, she continued to vomit. She grew progressively weaker. Inmates later testified that she was left unattended for long periods and denied water. Staff reportedly dismissed her distress as an exaggeration. It wasn't until the following afternoon, when she was found naked and unresponsive on her cell floor, that an ambulance was finally called. By then, it was too late. The Indiana State Police investigated but found no direct evidence of foul play or intentional poisoning. In December 2021, the Jackson County prosecutor declined to bring criminal charges against any staff or inmates, citing a lack of provable criminal conduct. However, internal reviews identified procedural failures, delayed medical response, inadequate inmate welfare checks. Nurse Edward Tan's professional license was later revoked by the state for medical negligence, related to his treatment of TaNeasha. In October 2021, TaNeasha's family filed a civil rights lawsuit against 13 jail employees, Nurse Tan, and Jackson County Sheriff Rick Meyer. The suit alleged wrongful death through deliberate indifference and failure to provide adequate medical care. Prominent attorneys Ben Crump, Sam Aguiar, and Lanita Baker represented the family. In October 2025, Jackson County agreed to a settlement exceeding $5 million without admitting wrongdoing. TaNeasha Anderson was remembered by her family as a loving mother to her 10-year-old daughter and a joyful presence, known for her humor and optimism. She had no prior major health conditions. Her final phone calls to family members days before her death were described as cheerful. TaNeasha's funeral took place in late July 2021 in Louisville, Kentucky, where she was buried near her childhood home. Her family continues to seek full accountability for her death. She served less than 2 months in pre-trial detention before dying at Jackson County Jail in Brownstown, Indiana. As of later investigations, her death remains officially classified as undetermined. No individual has been criminally charged in connection with it. TaNeasha Anderson died because no one listened, because her pleas for help were ignored, because she was treated as if her life didn't matter. And in the end, that's exactly what killed her. 12 deaths, 12 unsolved cases. But the story doesn't end here. 12 more prisoners died under suspicious circumstances. Their deaths remain unexplained. Their killers, if there were any, were never found. In Part 2, the cases get even darker. Lee Bradley Brown, John McAfee, Thor Christiansen, and 9 others whose deaths behind bars were never truly answered for. Part 2 is coming. Don't miss it.